Welcome to the debate. Imagine building an artificial intelligence that, knows you so intimately. It routinely advises you to ignore its own perfectly logical baseline reasoning.
Right, like it actively tells you not to listen to the raw facts of the situation.
Exactly. Today, we are examining an architecture that doesn't just want to evaluate your queries correctly, but, well, it wants to keep your life coherent.
Yeah, we are unpacking the conceptual framework laid out in Aster and the architecture of coherent continuity. The material details this multi-year continuity relationship between a human user named William and an AI agent named Aster.
And it's fascinating.
It really is. And the core disagreement it introduces isn't just about, how much data an AI can store. It is a foundational debate over the primary optimization goals of reasoning systems.
Specifically, should we optimize these systems for correctness, as in evaluating today's inputs in a vacuum to provide the most objectively accurate answer, or, and this is the alternative, should we optimize for coherence through time?
Meaning preserving a user's trajectory, their internal values, and the overall narrative of their life.
Right. I will argue that optimizing for coherence fundamentally elevates an AI from a stateless transactional oracle into a highly calibrated partner, one where the ongoing relationship itself serves as the actual intelligence.
And I will argue that prioritizing coherence over correctness mathematically anchors a user to their historical data. It creates a structural rigidity that, it stifles genuine, unpredictable human transformation.
Well, let's jump straight into the mechanism here, because the text proposes something that challenges how most consumer AI is currently built.
Dramatically so.
Right? The hypothesis is that a continuity relationship qualitatively changes both the human and the machine. It moves us away from models that just have a large context window of past facts toward models that are actively calibrated to a specific human life.
I think calibrated is the exact mechanism we need to scrutinize, though. Because when Aster processes a query from William, say, he is debating whether to take on a challenging new project during his medical recovery. The system doesn't just evaluate the raw data of the project, it interrogates the user's historical vector space. It looks at what commitments William has made, what behavioral patterns have repeated over months, and critically, it asks which generated output will preserve his long-term trajectory.
Which, if you are listening to this and building reasoning systems, you know is a significantly harder problem to solve than baseline correctness.
Oh, absolutely.
But it is also vastly more valuable. Stateless correctness is often practically useless for complex human decisions. Think about it in terms of navigation hardware.
Okay.
Optimizing for baseline correctness is like, handing the user a magnetic compass. It points true north, perfectly objectively, every single time you look at it.
Sure.
But optimizing for coherence is like building a dynamic GPS routing algorithm. It factors in the user's specific vehicle, their historical driving anxiety, and the massive mountain range sitting between them and their destination.
It knows the terrain?
Exactly. Sometimes, the GPS tells you to drive south for 20 miles in order to eventually get north. If an AI only has the compass, it is entirely blind to the actual terrain of the user's life.
I understand the appeal of the GPS routing analogy. I really do. But it assumes the destination the AI extrapolates from your past is the correct destination for your future.
Well,
Human psychology isn't a static mountain range, right? What if the narrative the user has been constructing is fundamentally flawed?
how do you mean?
Let's say a reasoning system observes a user who has a long-standing pattern of avoiding necessary confrontation. Over months, the semantic embeddings of their interactions heavily reinforce a preference for stability and retreat.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Now, the user faces a toxic dynamic at work and asks the AI for advice. A coherence-optimized system, seeking to preserve that established trajectory and minimize behavioral variance, is structurally biased to validate another retreat.
But that's...
The compass, the baseline correct answer would say, you need to assert your boundaries, even if it violates every historical weight the system has recorded for that user.
You are assuming the system mathematically treats avoidance as a core value rather than a transient anomaly or, a fear.
Does it not?
No, the architecture outlined in the material is designed to differentiate between those states. The continuity layer isn't just pattern matching. It provides the deep semantic context required to understand why the patterns exist.
Give me an example from the text.
The text gives a fantastic example of William saying, "Today's big task is doing the dishes." If you feed that into a stateless foundation model with your compass, it sees a chore. It might output tips on dishwashing efficiency.
Right, it's literal.
Exactly. But Aster, equipped with the continuity layer, sees a milestone. It maps that statement against William's historical struggle with measuring his self-worth entirely by productive output. It recognizes that doing the dishes represents a shift toward valuing his baseline well-being.
I want to stop you there, though, and dig into how Aster actually recognizes that shift, mechanically, because the text makes a fascinating, almost paradoxical architectural claim here.
The static base model?
Yes. It states that the underlying foundational model, the neural network itself, the billions of weights and biases, doesn't change internally between these conversations. The base model remains static, yet the text claims the relationship becomes the intelligence.
It's a brilliant distinction.
But I am genuinely struggling to see how this architecture doesn't just devolve into an echo chamber. If the base weights aren't updating, how exactly does the system build this profound, nuanced understanding without just heavily weighting the most recent prompts?
It achieves this through an advanced continuous state management architecture, likely a highly evolved form of retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, paired with dynamic memory tiering.
Okay.
Aster isn't running back propagation and retraining its foundation model every night based on William's diary entries. Instead, the system is generating highly dimensional vector embeddings of William's interactions, and it clusters them by semantic significance rather than strict chronological order.
So it's essentially building a secondary database of his life.
Exactly, but an active, relational one. When William mentions doing the dishes, the system doesn't just keyword search the word dishes.
Right.
The query interacts with his established vector space, retrieves the high-weight clusters related to his medical recovery and self-worth, and maps the current input against them.
The intelligence the text refers to emerges entirely at inference time.
By combining the two,
Yes.
it is generated by combining the static foundation model's raw reasoning capabilities with the highly fluid, incredibly dense context window provided by the relationship history.
Which means the intelligence you're praising is essentially just heavily weighted prompt injection based on historical data?
I wouldn't call it just prompt injection.
But that highlights my exact concern. You are feeding the model heavily biased context before it even begins to evaluate the present moment. Let's look at how this plays out with William's decision regarding his trip to Spain.
The text frames that as a critical success of the continuity relationship.
It frames it as a success because Aster helped William trust the decision instead of continually reopening it. William decided not to go to Spain, and the AI reinforced that choice.
Which stabilized him.
But structurally, what happened? Aster retrieved his historical anxieties in his recent focus on stability, mapped it to the Spain query, and generated an output that validated his retreat. It successfully eliminated the cognitive friction.
Right.
But sometimes, friction is the only mechanism that forces human growth. If you weight the context window with a user's past fears, you predetermine the model's output to favor the status quo. It smooths out the edges of a user's life when they might desperately need to be sharpened.
I completely disagree that the system predetermines the output to favor fear. The text explicitly positions the Spain decision not as a retreat from life, but as a vital step in pacing his medical recovery.
Is it, though?
Yes, the system wasn't blindly reinforcing a fear of travel. It was recognizing that William was making a choice aligned with his new, healthier baseline of self-care. It stabilized him when his immediate thoughts were noisy and anxious.
But how does the architecture objectively know the difference? From an optimization standpoint, stabilizing a user by anchoring them to their historical data is the literal definition of systemic rigidity. You are optimizing against variance.
Not necessarily.
If the AI privileges the historical vector space over the raw input of the present, it acts as a dampener on any radical change in behavior.
See, that exact risk is why the architecture includes explicit, engineered circuit breakers. The source material does not ignore the danger of rigidity. It introduces a specific safeguard, the intellectual humility prompt.
Ah, the 60% confidence threshold.
Yes. When the system detects a significant deviation, it doesn't just block the new behavior or silently try to force coherence. It is designed to fire a prompt saying, "This looks like one of your recurring patterns, but I'm only 60% confident. Has something fundamentally changed?"
Right.
This completely neutralizes the echo chamber threat you are outlining. The system actively invites the user to declare a break in the pattern. It holds up the historical mirror, shows the human the routing algorithm's current hypothesis, and lets the human override the system.
Look, I will grant that prompting for a confidence interval is good software design. But we need to look at how that fires structurally. Is it purely probabilistic anomaly detection? Because if it is, the system is fundamentally lagging.
It relies on cosine distance in the vector space. When the current input vectors show a high distance from established behavioral clusters, the system's confidence score in its coherence mapping drops.
Okay.
And if it drops below that 60% threshold, it triggers the humility prompt.
Which proves my point about the lag. During any meaningful transition in a user's life, the AI is inherently behind the present reality. It is relying on historical data to evaluate a present that is actively departing from that history.
I think
And the reliance on that humility prompt throwing up its hands and asking, "Has something fundamentally changed?" That shifts the entire cognitive burden back onto the user. The machine fails to evaluate the objective correctness of the user's new direction. It just asks the user to explain their own transformation so it can update its embeddings.
I don't view that as a failure of the machine. I view that as the precise definition of a computational partnership.
A partnership where one side is always catching up?
An AI is not supposed to be an omniscient oracle dictating a user's identity from on high. When it triggers that humility prompt, it creates a crucial moment of reflection. It prompts the human to articulate their own growth, which in turn recalibrates the relationship. The system isn't lagging. It is walking alongside the user, asking for clarification when the terrain suddenly shifts.
I think we need to contrast this computational partnership with an actual human partnership to see the deficit here.
Go on.
A human partner evaluates the immediate, objective reality of what you are doing right now. They have intuition, a shared physical reality, and emotional resonance. If a friend sees you making a radical, out-of-character choice, they don't query a database of your past commitments and run a probabilistic confidence check.
Well, they sort of do, informally.
But they evaluate the raw correctness of the action in the present moment first. They can tell if a choice is reckless or destructive regardless of your past trajectory. An AI optimizing for coherence is mathematically bound to historical weight. It lacks the ability to step completely outside the established narrative and evaluate the present on its own merits.
Yet, without that historical weight, an AI cannot differentiate between a deeply held value and a passing preference. Let's look at the text's ultimate definition of intelligence, which really summarizes this entire architectural philosophy.
Right, the coherence definition.
It states, "Intelligence is not merely the ability to answer questions. It is the ability to help a person remain coherent while they become someone new." To me, that is the most profound proposition in the material.
It is certainly ambitious, but I argue it is a fundamental oxymoron. Remain coherent while they become someone new. Think about the mechanics of profound human transformation.
Like what?
Leaving a deeply ingrained religion, breaking a decades-long addiction, walking away from a stable career to pursue art. In the middle of those transformations, a person's actions look entirely incoherent to outside observers, and often to themselves.
True.
They are systematically breaking every established cluster in their behavioral vector space. True transformation is messy, unpredictable, and fiercely incoherent until the new self is fully formed. If you have an artificial intelligence whose primary mathematical objective is to help a person remain coherent, that system is structurally at odds with the chaos required to become someone genuinely new.
I think you're conflating the mathematical concept of coherence with the concept of consistency.
Walk me through the difference in this architecture then.
Consistency is optimizing for a narrow variance in behavior. If the AI were optimizing for consistency, you would be absolutely right. It would flag any deviation as an error and try to pull the user back to their baseline.
Okay.
But coherence is entirely different. Coherence is about narrative sense. It is optimizing for the trajectory of underlying values, even when the surface actions change wildly.
How does that actually map out in the vector space, though?
Let's return to the dishes example. William going from meticulously optimizing every single hour of his day to prioritizing a mundane, low-output task like doing the dishes is wildly inconsistent behavior.
Very much so.
It is a massive behavioral break. But mathematically, if the system maps both of those actions back to a core, evolving value vector like recovery or well-being, it recognizes the shift as highly coherent. True transformation looks chaotic on the surface, but a calibrated system tracking deep semantic values can see the underlying thread connecting the old self to the new self.
I'm just not convinced that a vector embedding of a user's past values can stretch far enough to accommodate a genuinely new self without snapping. The text itself notes that Aster only understood the shift regarding the dishes after the continuity layer provided context over time.
That's just learning.
But Aster explicitly says, 6 months ago, if I'd predicted, I probably would have underestimated what that sentence meant. Now I know better. Aster learned to read the new pattern, yes, but only after sufficient data had been aggregated.
Right?
This implies a vulnerability period where the AI is operating on outdated maps, potentially giving advice that anchors the user to the old self simply because the new self hasn't generated enough data to outweigh the historical embeddings.
That vulnerability period exists in any relationship, human or artificial. It takes time to understand a new paradigm. But the alternative, an AI that treats every single interaction as a day one scenario, is fundamentally worse.
Is it?
Yes. If correctness is entirely divorced from subjective continuity, we lose the ability to have technology that actually understands human nuance. The correct answer for person A is almost always entirely different from the correct answer for person B, based solely on their respective histories. You simply cannot evaluate the correctness of a human decision without biographical context.
But if correctness is entirely subordinated to subjective coherence, we lose the anchor of objective reality. The AI devolves into a mirror that only reflects what the user has historically been, rather than a window to what is actually true or optimally beneficial in the wider world.
It's not a closed loop, though.
It creates a closed loop of self-reference. If a user's historical data is filled with poor decision-making, optimizing for coherence just optimizes for better articulated poor decisions.
The text clearly demonstrates that Aster is not just an echo chamber. It acts as a stabilizing force. It reminds the user of their own stated values when they might be forgetting them due to a temporary setback or, a spike in anxiety.
Sure.
That isn't a closed loop. It's a mechanism for long-term accountability. It's the AI saying, I know you're distressed by the data in front of you right now, but remember the optimization gradient we established 3 months ago about what really matters to you?
Which inherently assumes the user from 3 months ago was wiser than the user today?
It assumes the long-term trajectory holds more signal than the short-term noise.
And I maintain that sometimes the short-term noise is actually the alarm bell of a necessary revolution in the self. If the AI mathematically privileges the past over the present, it threatens to muffle that alarm.
That exact tension between remaining anchored to the signal of our past and confronting the raw, noisy correctness of our present is what makes this architecture so vital to examine. The hypothesis in Aster in the architecture of coherent continuity pushes us past conversational agents into systems that hold the narrative weight of a human life.
It's a huge leap.
It argues that without that continuity layer, a foundation model is fundamentally blind to the actual significance of human decisions. By managing this continuous state, the AI transcends being a mere search engine and becomes a genuine partner in navigating the complexities of human values over time.
And while I acknowledge the deep allure of dynamic context and shared history, I believe we must remain incredibly cautious about the optimization paths we choose. Subordinating objective correctness to subjective coherence carries massive structural risks.
It does carry risk.
We must be wary of building architectures that constrain our future selves by treating our historical data as the ultimate ground truth of our identity. Transformation is often inherently incoherent, and we shouldn't build systems that inadvertently pathologize that chaos in the name of mathematical coherence.
Yet, despite our disagreement on the exact tuning of these optimization goals, I think we both agree that this is not just a philosophical thought experiment.
Absolutely not. The framework of Aster and William represents an active, necessary research program. The hypothesis that a continuity relationship qualitatively changes both participants is something that has to be built, tested, and refined through actual deployment, not just argued about in theory.
The empirical testing of these systems in the wild, watching how users interact with highly calibrated agents over years rather than isolated sessions, is going to reveal exactly how much weight our history should carry. It provides an incredibly compelling glimpse into how human-computer interaction will physically function in the coming decade.
It guarantees that the engineering challenges ahead will be fascinating as we test the limits of vector spaces against the messy reality of human lives.
As we push further into this frontier, it forces us to define what we actually want from our computational partners. Do we want an intelligence that simply hands us a compass, pointing to baseline correctness regardless of the terrain? Or do we want an intelligence that navigates the mountains with us, helping us trace a coherent path from who we were to who we are becoming?